You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Bewick. News, views and interviews in association with FE News. Evening folks, my name's Tom Bewick and welcome to the only community radio show connecting the world of FE. And I hear there's a new baby boy that's arrived in Downing Street. Will he be a blondie, I wonder? Anyway, as for Skills World, thanks everyone for contacting us so far about the show. Do keep those emails coming in. Still more episodes ahead during COVID-19, so simply email the team on skillsworld@fenews.co.uk. I've been reliably informed the show is being regularly listened to on an evening dog walk. One colleague today even told me that she listens to the show on playback during her morning fitness exercise regime. Nice to be providing such a vital public service. Anyway, pressing on. I'm really looking forward to tonight's show. Not only because we've got some super FE guests on the programme this evening, as always, but also because the main theme we'll be exploring tonight is a subject very close to my own heart. In fact, two words sum up my life's passion in the whole arena of FE: apprenticeships and quality. On tonight's Skills World Live, I'll be talking to a former Special Advisor to Ministers, Tom Richmond, who has since left government to set up his own think tank. That's right, folks. Just when you thought the skills system couldn't take another think tank report advocating major reform to the sector, EDSK's Tom Richmond has weighed in with a controversial report saying that there are too many, and I quote, fake apprenticeships. And if two Toms are not enough for you, it's brilliant that we'll also be joined by Tom Burton, not the actor Tim Burton, but Tom Burton, a Yorkshire lad who certainly knows his way around the world of endpoint assessment of apprenticeships. And in case you were thinking that Kelle O'Meara, the show's female editor, was allowing too many blokes called Tom on Skills World Live this evening, we'll be talking with my fab colleagues, Charlotte Bosworth of Innovate Awards and Kelle McQuade of TQ UK. But before we go any further, let's find out what's been making the news headlines in your skills world this evening. Secretary of State Gavin Williamson has come under fire from MPs for not doing enough to support training providers during COVID-19. Appearing in front of the Education Select Committee earlier today, Mr Williamson was accused by the Labour MP for Gateshead, Ian Mearns, of not doing enough to implement the Cabinet Office guidance on supply relief. The Secretary of State replied that his department always complied with Cabinet Office rules and always would. He also said that his department would be pressing ahead with the planned T-level rollout this September, which will happen in advance of a planned FE white paper, which ministers have described as revolutionary. In other news, the Education Skills Funding Agency has announced a crackdown on independent training providers with poor achievement rates. The government quango expects providers to meet a minimum achievement rate of 62% for apprenticeships, with the sector average recently falling to just 64%. The ESFA published updated guidance today, saying it would be writing to those providers affected next week. Achievement rates are a key measure of performance and accountability in the post-16 skills system, with ultimately the funding agency having the power to terminate its contracts with providers. And finally, staff at East Sussex College Group have been working together to create protective headgear for NHS staff. Pauline Craig, who works at the Hastings campus of the college, has put her craft skills to work to make headbands and wash bags for frontline COVID-19 staff to store their PPE equipment. A midwife at the Conquest Hospital in Hastings told this programme that Pauline's ideas were quite simply ingenious. That's all your Skills World news from fenews.co.uk. Contact us at Skills World Live. Email skillsworld@fenews.co.uk. Follow us on Twitter @Tom Bewick, @FENews. Use the hashtag SkillsWorld. Call us on 02032 900 111. That's 02032 900 111. For tonight's big debate, we are looking at the whole issue of quality in apprenticeships. After major reform of the system dating back as far as 2013, are too many employers still offering, well, fake apprenticeships? For those of you with long memories, you'll know this is not the first time an accusation like this has been levelled at England's apprenticeship system. The Dragon's Den entrepreneur Doug Richard, in his review in 2012, found that too many people were not even aware they were doing apprenticeships. And some of those that were doing apprenticeships could find themselves being trained to stack supermarket shelves in just 12 weeks. That's not a real apprenticeship, I hear you say, which is why the then government rushed to ban any apprenticeship programmes with less than 12 months duration. It led to a flurry of reforms on the back of the Richard Review. Out with the old apprenticeship frameworks, and in came the new employer-involved standards. Out went qualifications, for the most part, and in came competency-based endpoint assessments. Out went the Labour-created Quango, the UK Commission for Employment and Skills. Remember them? And in came a shiny new institute, the one we know and love as IFATE. Since the institute's inception, over 600 new standards have been developed. Unlike the past, apprenticeships now span from level 2, GCSE level if you're struggling with the terminology, right up to levels 7 and 8. That's PhD. That's right, folks. It doesn't matter how old you are, how many qualifications or degrees you may already have, the generosity of the apprenticeship levy in England is happy to pay for your MBA at Cranfield. Or at least it was until very recently, before the Secretary of State, Gavin Williamson, ordered a crackdown. It seems MBAs are not the only starts that might now fall off a cliff. Before the employer levy was introduced in April 2017, English apprenticeships were averaging more than 150,000 starts per quarter. In the last quarter of 2019, they have plummeted to less than 70,000. The government says it's all about quality, not quantity. But critics, like our special guest on tonight's show, can't help but smell a rat. The former political advisor at the Department for Education has accused officials of implementing a runaway training system, an apprenticeship model that has seen the participation of young people below the age of 25 participating in the scheme collapse. Meanwhile, supermarket bosses and hedge fund managers can use their levy to go back to university without so much as a student loans company application form in sight. The National Audit Office has produced 2 reports on the apprenticeship reforms. It concludes that the new system is costing taxpayers twice as much, yet delivering half the number. I'll be exploring tonight. Does that matter? Is it time to stop rubbishing the apprenticeship system we've got and all start working together to make it the world-class success ministers want to see? After this short musical break, I'll be talking to EDSK's Tom Richmond, and I'll be asking him directly, if all these reformed apprenticeships are approved by a government institute, how on earth can any of them be fake? You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Bewick.
Yeah, her love can make a person hazy. Praying she won't break
That was Hear Me Calling, Spring Gang with Easton. Remember, all of our tracks supporting independent artists during COVID-19 can all be found on the website epidemicsound.com. No relationship to the current pandemic, I'm told. Anyway, let's kick on with tonight's big debate. And joining me on the line is Tom Richmond, who's the founder and director at EDSK. Good evening, Tom.
Good evening.
From one Tom to another. Tom, I want to ask you a question, really, just get sort of straight to the heart of this debate. What do you mean by fake apprenticeships?
So it was a term that obviously caught a lot of people's attention on the day that we published our report just a few months ago. And ultimately, it comes right back to what the definition of an apprenticeship is. And it's quite clear that the government has taken, over the past few years, a very liberal definition of an apprenticeship, and employers have very much supported them in doing that. But when we looked under the bonnet in our report about what is included in these courses, what training do they offer, who do they offer that training to, and what does it really confer, we found that, frankly, a lot of these courses are nothing to do with apprenticeships at all, and yet they are being funded through the apprenticeship levy.
But hold on a minute. I mean, back in 2012, when the former Dragon's Den entrepreneur Doug Richard looked at the then English apprenticeship system, I mean, he was saying exactly the same things that you're now saying in 2020. I mean, surely we've moved on since then.
I think it's very worrying that we are having exactly the same conversation that Doug Richard had back in 2012 when he wrote his report, where he would talk about the fact that we just bundle, a large number of different activities into the apprenticeship program. It makes the system complicated. It dilutes the brand. It makes the value for money go down, and it distracts what apprenticeships are best at, which in this country and in other countries, it's always been getting people started in skilled occupations. I mean, that is the core, as we explained in our report, that is the core of what an apprenticeship has always been in this country, and indeed we think still is, in the best apprenticeship systems in the world. And if we move away from that, there is a very serious risk that the apprenticeship brand, we think, starts to become less meaningful, and that is a really, really big problem.
I just think it's interesting that Richard himself made all the same types of criticisms that you're now making about this system, but the kind of reforms, of course, that his review brought in, he said that the old frameworks were not up to scratch, so we've had this massive investment in developing new competency-based standards. He made a point of saying that apprenticeships really should be about competence, and therefore he wanted to separate, if you like, the world of the provision, the people providing the training, with those that were actually assessing for the competence, hence the growth of endpoint assessment organisations. I mean, all of those tenets of the Richard review reforms are still in place. Now, Baroness Wolfe in 2017, or just actually before then, came up with the idea of the levy, because Richard, although he talked about the financing of apprenticeships, he didn't really particularly go into any detail about the levy. But surely most of the reforms that he posited at the time have been implemented. And in fact, he made the point that unlike other apprenticeship systems around the world, what England was famous for was having, I think the terminology he used, an expansive apprenticeship model. In other words, it starts at entry level at level 2 and potentially could go all the way up to degree. But your report contradicts that and says, really, we should just offer apprenticeships at level 3. Why do you think that's appropriate?
Yeah, so the idea of an expansive versus a restrictive apprenticeship is something that I know the Gatsby Foundation have written about in the past as well, and it's a really interesting point. And a lot of it, I think, ultimately comes down to priorities. I think one of the things that people I saw in a reaction to our report quite a lot was that some people said, oh, well, if they say we shouldn't have higher level apprenticeships, then we clearly, this report is saying we don't need any training at higher levels. And we were saying, no, that's not what we're saying here. What we're saying is we have a finite pot of money that is now being produced by the apprenticeship levy. Obviously, we're not sure how much money it's going to be raising in the foreseeable future, but it was predicted to raise about £3 billion a year and did do so in the first couple of years. But this really is a question of, when you've got that money coming into the Treasury, what is the best way of generating the greatest benefit with that funding? And so when you take an expansive view of an apprenticeship and you start saying that money, as we found, is being used for training people to work in coffee shops, doing basic office administration, people just working on a basic shop checkout role at the same time as sending people on MBA courses at global multinational companies and doing management training, et cetera, et cetera. If you take that expansive view, then you really aren't prioritizing any particular group. And it means that young people who often, I think, do need more support than older learners, and particularly getting people started in jobs as well, they're going to miss out. And that is what the data is showing. It is young people and new recruits who are now being squeezed out of the system. And that is the danger when you take an expansive view. And as you say, one of Doug Richard's big visions was that employers should have a much bigger say than they did under the old frameworks in what should be in an apprenticeship. And as a general rule, that's a very powerful and very positive thing. But the problem is there haven't been enough boundaries put in place on what employers can start branding and labelling as an apprenticeship, in our view. Yeah,
well, let's talk about those boundaries, because I think you're right. There's not going to be very much sympathy out there in the sector, never mind in the wider public, for the idea of taxpayer-funded, or at least fully taxpayer-funded MBAs at Cranfield. And indeed, I think the Secretary of State felt that way too, and asked the Institute to look into it. And I believe, although MBA apprenticeships will continue, they won't be paid for in quite the same way as they have been hitherto. But your remarks there about level 2 and also in the report, I mean, surely COVID-19 has really woken the whole country up to the fact that we depend on these so-called low-skilled. They're not necessarily low-skilled, but they're often called low-skilled. They're certainly low-paid. And, who are the people right now who are out there who are supporting us through this national emergency? They're people who are the, warehouse operatives. They're the people who work in the restaurants and bars. Sadly, they can't at the moment because most of them will be furloughed. But I guess my point is, the very people who you're saying effectively apprenticeships shouldn't be available for are the very people that support the backbone of the British economy. Do you not think it's just a bit of old-fashioned snobbery there, looking down at those people?
It's a really interesting point, and that is exactly one of the pieces of feedback that we received on the day. That we were, by saying that we shouldn't have level 2 apprenticeships, in inverted commas, people thought we were taking away a rung on the ladder for actually a huge number of people to get started in their careers. Our point about level 2 apprenticeships was actually very different from that. Although we don't think there should be a brand such as level 2 apprenticeships, we said that the term apprenticeship should be restricted to courses at level 3. What we meant by that was, and hopefully people who read the report picked this up, was that what we can't do is leave people stranded at level 2. The statistics on the progression of people from level 2 to level 3 is genuinely shocking. It is a tiny percentage of people who start a level 2 apprenticeship, finish that level 2 apprenticeship, and then move on to a level 3. Right. And that's why we're so concerned, because in other countries, they just don't do this. The reason they have generally longer apprenticeships in other countries is not because they're necessarily doing anything particularly amazing that we're not capable of doing in this country. But what they do is they say the point at which your training is done is at a much higher level. We're only going to let you off at level 3, which is why their courses tend to last 2 to 3 years, as opposed to us having a level 2 for 12 months in general, although there are some that last a bit longer, and then taking a level 3 course on top of that. And we think it's that differentiation, it's called vertical differentiation between level 2 and level 3. We think that is the problem. Of course, we need to get people started at entry-level roles. That's a fantastically important route for so
why
many
not,
people.
Okay, so why not recommend or support a system that is still there's a place for level 2, but rather than level 2 being a destination, because I think you make that point well in the report that, frankly, too many people, although this is probably an issue across the whole workforce, too many people, sure. And by the way, a lot of graduates, who are very indebted are in jobs that are, if you like, underutilising their skills. So it's a structural problem with the British labour market. But surely what we should be advancing here in England is the notion of a skills escalator, where it starts at level 2, it progresses quickly to level 3, because actually all the research studies, OECD and others, show that where our biggest productivity gap is at the so-called intermediate level. By that, increasingly, we're looking also at level 4 and level 5. And actually part of the appeal, would you not agree, of the English apprenticeship reforms is that we've moved away from this sort of notion that the only way you can get a degree level education is via the traditional A-level academic red brick, Russell University group approach. actually we've got now in our post-16 system the notion that a young person, and I take your point, and I think we'll come on to that, where young people are actually in our apprenticeship model, but in theory, a young person can leave school with GCSEs, they can take an apprenticeship, they can go all the way up to degree level, a bit like actually our serving minister who doesn't, she goes around saying that she did a equivalent of a degree level apprenticeship. So, although obviously, different time period to the one we're discussing now. So surely that's a good thing in the British or English apprenticeship model. Would you disagree with that?
I think your analogy of a ladder is obviously something that Robert Halfon, the chair of the Education Select Committee in Parliament, has talked about a lot. And I think it's a very, very powerful idea. So what we said in our report was that we should combine the existing level 2 and level 3 training courses where they both exist together in an occupation to make sure that that is a really rigorous apprenticeship that only lets people get off at level 3. But to keep that ladder intact, what we said, admittedly towards the end of the report, was that we need a really strong pre-apprenticeship training course in this country. It's something that Doug Richard talked about back in 2012, although it very much flew under the radar. Of course, we've tried traineeships. They haven't quite, I think, reached a lot of the goals that some people were hoping they would. But countries like Switzerland and Germany, they put a huge amount of effort into making sure they've got these programs for people to get them ready to take on an apprenticeship so that they can set that benchmark at level 3 to make sure that when you're on that apprenticeship program, your stepping off point is going to be at level 3 so that when you go into the labour market, you've got all the skills and the knowledge that you need to have a huge amount of currency and for you to be in control of where you go next. Whereas at the moment, when you get let off at level 2, which the vast, vast majority of level 2 learners do, you just don't have that ability to start controlling your own career in the way that a level 3 apprentice would. So that the idea of the ladder is 100% the right idea. We do not believe that leaving so many learners stranded at level 2 is the way to achieve that.
Okay. Briefly, I've just got time to ask you, what is the future of the levy in your view? Because, I mean, you talk about in your report, it is a tax effectively. Only 2% of British firms pay it at the moment. You could argue that ministers in the Treasury pulled a bit of a fast one because the levy was introduced, but the previous funding of the previous government, about $2.5 billion, obviously was taken away during the austerity years. What's the future of funding apprenticeships in your view?
Well, I go back to the previous point that I made about priorities. Obviously, the public finances this year are going to produce some of the most startling numbers we've probably ever seen in our lifetime in terms of how much money the government's going to have to borrow to keep our economy afloat. But obviously what it can't do is stop thinking about the future in that context. But if you go back to my point about priorities, the question is still the same. You've got money coming in. Employers have obviously, been paying that levy all the way through, and they will continue to pay that levy, assuming that they've got the staff still in place. So there's going to be money there. What is the best way to help apprenticeships or use apprenticeships to kickstart our economy again? And in that context, I think you'd be really hard pushed to say that sending people on management training courses at big companies, particularly existing employees, I simply cannot believe that they should be the priority right now when we're going to have some apprentices losing their jobs. We're going to have young people coming out of school and college and university with far fewer opportunities than they've ever had. To me, the priority, as we said in our report, has got to be getting young people into skilled occupations and careers. And I think that's going to be even more important over the next 12 months than it has been probably in my lifetime. Okay. And so for me, unashamedly, that's where the money should be going.
Tom Richmond, founder and director at EDSK. Pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for coming on the show this evening.
Thank you, Tom.
Cheers. You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Bewick. Welcome back, everybody. We're going to continue tonight's big debate, and we're asking the questions: are too many apprenticeships in England of low quality? Well, you heard quite a critical point of view there. But I'm delighted to continue the conversation with two people who you could say are absolutely at the front line of delivering quality apprenticeships. First of all, Kelle McQuade, who's the Endpoint Assessment Director at TQ UK, and Tom Burton, the Director of Apprenticeships for NOCN. Kelle, Tom, welcome to the show. Kelle, let's start with you. Yeah, good evening. Good evening, Tom. The other Tom, you there?
Good
evening to you. Great. Kelle, let's start with you first. Do you think Tom Richmond has a point that too many apprenticeships are fake?
I think it's about how you might interpret that message. I think Tom tried to be clearer in his conversation with you earlier, Tom, about the important role, and I do believe it's an important role, that level 2 apprenticeships in particular need to play. I think it's important that we provide an alternative education forum for young people, and level 2 is often a more difficult population for us to reach in terms of education.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily agree with it being a fake apprenticeship. I think there's an important role for the Institute to play in defining what classifies and meets the threshold of an apprenticeship.
Right.
And I think that's an important role that they need to do in order of making sure that actually any product at level 2 that does come to market does meet that threshold.
Okay. Tom, taking that point and that explanation there by Kelle, would you support a kind of rebalancing of the apprenticeship model, perhaps towards more young people? That was a criticism in Tom Richmond's report. And, more of a focus on those entry-level, intermediate-level skills, which, of course, was something else he called for. Or, do you agree that the expansive approach to apprenticeships has been a good thing?
I think absolutely it is a good thing. Certainly widening the market out to encompass almost 600 different roles, moving on from the SACE framework days, is a massively great thing. There is some mileage, I think, in the combination of a level 2 and level 3, but then you start straying into the world of what they're trying to do with T levels. So, I think level 2s have a rightful place. They do. Certainly that's where I started my career in hospitality from a level 2 point of view. So to abandon those and wrap them up and package everything as in a similar mind to what they're doing with T levels and the outcome of an A level in being a level 3, I think you're gonna miss such a raft of young people and 20, sure, 24 plus people in moving away from that ability to say, okay, I didn't achieve GCSE level 2 or grade C, etc. Therefore, appropriate is for me to hit that point as entry. And don't forget, we have a lot of people that are below level 2 ability that exit the school system that are between entry level 3 and level 1 anyway. So what do we do with those people? Sure.
Kelle, perhaps you can answer that. One of the outcomes of the recent reform, certainly since the levy came in 2017, is there's been a massive drop-off, not just in young people, but of course in those at level 2, and potentially, certainly if the old frameworks are switched off at the end of July, I suspect that could be exacerbated. What's the answer to ensure more young people and more of those people at the at level 2 can benefit from the apprenticeship programme?
I think there's a couple of parts to that. I think the first one is making sure that the apprenticeship route is accessible to all young people, and that I think there's still further education for us to do with providers and employers to make sure that everybody fully understands that this is a viable route for apprentices to be able to take. I think the change in apprenticeship saw a huge change in terms of trying to put the apprenticeship in the hands of the employer. And I think a lot of the focus on educating around these reforms has been based on the providers. So there's still a lot of work I think we need to do with employers to make them understand actually the benefit of having an apprentice, and particularly maybe starting with an apprentice at level 2, somebody that you can attract young talent into your organisation and allow them to grow, and to kind of refer back to your analogy earlier on of kind of climbing that kind of ladder through the ranks, nothing to stop them progressing on to higher apprenticeships from there.
Right. Tom, would you support the extension of frameworks? There's a sort of rumour going around that potentially, the old frameworks could get another year's run out in the park. Do you think that's a good idea?
I think we just kick the can down the road.
Right.
To use the old Brexit analogy and
don't get me on that, Tom.
Through Parliament, we're just going to kick the can down the road. The frameworks and the failings or advantages of frameworks, whichever side of the fence you sit on, has now moved on.
Obviously, last summer the Institute gave forewarning that the frameworks would be switched off by the 1st of August. But with all this COVID-19, going on, and frankly concerns anyway, certainly amongst the independent training providers about supply relief and funding, surely it could be a good thing just to extend that. Kelle, what do you think about frameworks being potentially the can being kicked down the road, as Tom Burton described it?
For me, I'm not wedded to it not being delayed, and I think part of that is because I think COVID situation has delayed some of the other developments that need to still take place. We're talking about the kind of access to level 2 apprenticeships, and there's still a huge debate about whether or not there are sufficient numbers of level 2 apprenticeship standards to replace all of the frameworks. I know that business administrator at level 2 has been a huge topic and debate over the last kind of 12 months. And so I think whilst yes, we are kicking the can down the road, and I kind of do support that, we also need to be mindful that when we do make that switch off, that we have done so with consideration that there is a viable alternative for those level 2 apprentices.
Okay. Let's look to the future now. How affected do you think the whole apprenticeship model is going to be by, obviously, this terrible virus we're all living through and the impact of COVID-19? Tom, over to you.
Yeah, I think that this is a really good point, and certainly one that you mentioned earlier. The reduction in the UK GDP output is going to have an effect on the stability of the economy. The stability of the economy then has a direct impact on levy receipts. Levy receipts then have a direct impact on ability for providers to use that in terms of training. But also if you take, unfortunately, when companies look to restructure or restrict growth, they're going to look at the lower level workers they have, and unfortunately that's going to have a direct impact on numbers of apprentices they take on. So long term, I think there's a real issue in companies growing sufficiently to support the apprenticeship ecosystem. How that's fixed and supported is going to be a really question for the Department for Education, because they're going to see such an impact even in an 8-week to 12-week period where businesses may be closed, that the effect that what is likely to be a depression will have on new members of staff entering a workplace, be that apprentices or non-apprentices, is going to be significant, especially in hospitality, retail, tourism, hair.
So what's the answer then to that? Because you're absolutely right. I mean, at the moment, we've got many of those workers are on furlough. The Treasury, with the job retention scheme, is essentially helping to subsidise those private sector wages up to 80%, just to make sure people are not laid off and made redundant. We clearly are going to see quite a collapse in demand even when the lockdown ends, because we know we're going to have to coexist with this virus for quite some time. Do you think the Institute should be looking at some version of the job retention scheme, but for apprentices? So actually there's a financial incentive for employers to not just keep apprentices on, but importantly, take them on as well. Kelle?
Yeah, absolutely. As kind of Tom alluded to, we're going to have a real lag effect in with the apprenticeships, and we're already speaking with providers who are already forecasting not taking new starts kind of as late as kind of January kind of next year at kind of best. So we know that there's going to be this lag effect, and how big and widespread that is yet we wait to how that unfolds. But there absolutely needs to be more action taken to support this and to make sure that actually that lag period is the same lag period that all parts of the economy feel, and that it doesn't become the kind of start of the demise of the apprenticeship scheme. There needs to be that financial support, that real incentive to drive. And in doing that, they need to start to promote actually the real benefits and look at how the apprenticeship market can really be used as a tool for kind of the economy's kind of bounce back and recovery period.
Sure. I think the focus is very much now increasingly across the sector. People are looking to what the recovery plan should be. Tom, you run an endpoint assessment organisation. You're very well known in that sort of professional community, as indeed is Kelle, who runs the EPAO at TQ UK. Do you think endpoint assessment is a model that's here to stay? And the reason why I just raised that as a query is because when the National Audit Office did its report into the reformed apprenticeships, one of the observations it made was that the apprenticeship standards were costing twice as much, but delivering half as less in terms of the number of starts. But clearly the endpoint assessment piece as well, which takes up about sort of 20% of, on average, of the funding of apprenticeships. Do you think that could be an easy target by government looking to save money as a result of COVID-19?
Yeah, I suppose you're asking me, do I want to write myself out of a job?
No, I'm certainly not asking you that, but I'm just, it's like that strengths, threats, weaknesses, opportunities, all of that. It's just kind of looking
definitely
down there.
Yeah, this turkey is definitely not.
Good, I'm glad to hear it.
So, I mean, just to come back on some of the points, I think you're right. I mean, value for money in any tax-funded system should have scrutiny. Absolutely should have scrutiny. But I think it plays some really important parts to delivering that high quality apprenticeship system. Certainly, the separation of training from assessment is vital, and unfortunately, there has been, and I'm sure Kelle may mention similar instances where we have not completed endpoint assessment or failed people in endpoint assessment because the quality of their ability or competency or the quality of teaching and learning that they have had while they've been on programme hasn't been sufficient in the view of our industry experts. So rightly, are we then to say, okay, the end products are going to be a satisfactory one because we'll water down or sign off somebody just because it's a commercial business decision for us, and that's wrong. So really, endpoint assessment, the whole system is geared to police the quality for the Department for Education, particularly the ESFA, and uphold the integrity of the standards and the reasons the IFA exist.
Absolutely.
So I certainly think that is the EPA system perfect? Far from it. In all intents and purposes, it's 5 years into its delivery. But what it will give long term is a system that ministers and the likes of me and Kelle can stand behind and say, well, actually, yeah, we do make sure that the people that go through EPA in whatever industry, in whatever sector, are of high quality. Therefore, in the future, when these people start rolling off into intermediate and management jobs, start addressing that productivity gap that currently exists, because we've forced them into a situation where they have to perform to a high level to achieve their EPA. So there's going to be a long-term knock-on effect for quality as a result of EPA.
Yeah, Kelle, last word to you. Is TQ UK still managing to endpoint assess apprentices even with the lockdown?
Absolutely, we've been really responsive to being able to operationalise really quickly some of the flexibilities and additional kind of alterations that the IFA are making. So we have had 68% of all of our apprentices that have come through Gateway in April. We've been able to 100% complete as remote assessments. Since the 23rd of March, we've been able to do 92% of all total assessments we've been able to do remotely. And we're hoping by end of week we'll have some news on some further alterations that we can make. It's not easy, but we are absolutely stepping up to the challenge and making it work.
Great. Absolute pleasure to talk to you both. Thanks for coming on the show this evening. Kelle McQuade, Endpoint Assessment Director at TQ UK. Tom Burton, Director of Apprenticeships at NOCN, and a great Yorkshire lad. Thanks for joining us this evening on Skills World Live.
Thanks.
It's getting closer to midnight.
Great couple of colleagues there.
Get closer to you.
Let's have a track.
Drinking courage from my red cup now. I will soon make a move. Ooh, I can taste it. The bittersweetness of taking a shot.
That was Adore You. And it's another one of those tracks from What 3RS over at epidemicsound.com. So to continue the debate on the quality of apprenticeships, I'm joined by Rob Thakur, who's the Managing Director at Fitch Learning. Hi there, Rob. Hello. Have I got you on the studio mic? Are you there?
I am there, Tom. Yes. Hello.
Yeah, brilliant. Now, Rob, just to demonstrate that this is a community live radio show, we are going to now dial in, hopefully, Charlotte Bosworth. So just bear with me 1 second. This is an experiment, isn't it? Let's see if we can get... Hi, Charlotte. We can hear you. Let's merge the call. Now, have I got you both on Skills World Live? Charlotte?
I am here.
Great. What about you, Rob?
I am here, Tom, yes.
Brilliant. Well, the thing is, we're all in our homes, aren't we? We're in bloody lockdown. That's why I'm running a community radio station from a spare bedroom in Sussex. So thank you both. Thank you both for joining us.
You're welcome.
Whew, that was a close one. That was a close one. Right. Charlotte, let's start with you. Is endpoint assessment a better system than what existed before when frameworks, for example, included qualifications?
I don't think it's necessarily a question including or not including qualifications, but if we think of what does quality mean within apprenticeships, I think there's a few things here which cultivates in somebody getting recognition for their learning. So, if we kind of look at the whole system, we should actually start at the beginning, really. I think we have to start as how do we make sure that employers have made a concerted effort to recruit the right people based on the engagement and motivation of an individual? How do we make sure then they fully understand the nature, structure and the expectations of the programme they're there on? I think it's then actually the value of work within the programme and the workplace they're in, then making sure they've got that tailored support whilst on the programme. Quality of training and development, which quite often we get the most focus on, and that willingness for the employer to show that flexibility and actually give the time and the mentors for the individual on the programme. But then, back to your original point, Tom, it's then actually having a quality, independent, robust assessment, which is validated, all those knowledge, skills and behaviours that have been demonstrated on that programme in workplace. I don't see how that can be a bad thing, and to me actually shows the quality and the improvements that have been made since the reforms.
Indeed, and Tom Burton made that point, I think, very strongly earlier. Rob Thakur, you're Managing Director at Fitch Learning. You're a training provider. Are you involved in endpoint assessment as well? I don't think I've got that far on your website. Forgive me.
No, we're not. We focus on the training provision side, but I'd certainly agree with Charlotte's points there. It's looking at the full journey, from making sure that the employers understand what makes a good apprenticeship program. The intent and the rationale behind it is crucial for the employer and the learner. And then when we get to endpoint assessment, everyone's on the same page. They've had the benefits of the learning and the experience with the skills coach and the mentoring. And then absolutely, when you get to that endpoint assessment, I'd agree with Charlotte there that it's a great external validation and stamp of approval that you've achieved those knowledge, skills and behaviours. Yeah.
Rob, just going back to the theme of tonight's big debate, I don't think you caught up with Tom Richmond's interview with me earlier, but do you think he's got a point at all about fake apprenticeships?
Yeah, I just don't think it's that black and white. I think you've got to look at why this apprenticeship programme has been set up, and you've got to think about each individual employer. So at Fitch Learning, we specialise in financial services. That's our expertise and specialism. And we've really found, and I agree with Kelly's points here on your previous guest, where there's a real education piece with the employer, making sure they understand what the purpose of an apprenticeship is. They're not just chasing the levy. And if you get that right at the start, then you don't have the issue of a fake apprenticeship. Are they out there? Yes, I would say. There are some employers who, for whatever reason, haven't fully grasped the reasoning behind it, and they certainly exist. But I just don't think it's black and white as Tom's making out. I'd say really need to look at each one on their individual merits and look at the intent. I think that's the key.
Well, I mean, it's quite inflammatory for sure. Charlotte, what's your perspective on that? Fake apprenticeships.
So I absolutely, totally disagree with Tom's point on this. And, the big question around actually somebody investing in a levy and it is 0.5% tax, but actually that investment in the levy is only a small part of the investment that an employer would be making if they're actually offering a quality apprenticeship. And, that employer has to be strongly motivated to take on that individual, whether it's them already in their business and they're upskilling or reskilling, or actually a new individual joining their company. And there is a lot of investment they have to make right from the outset. They have to make sure that consistent, dedicated support in place. Those real employers that are in high quality and investing in this properly will make sure that those progression routes are in place. They'll have to make sure they've invested in making sure those strong collaborative relationships exist with their training providers so they can have that constructive communication, troubleshooting to support those individuals. And yes, I mean, the benefit of it ultimately is they end up with a motivated employer who is skilled, helping them be more productive, and more importantly, is helping the growth of their organisation.
Yeah.
So, I think the word fake apprenticeships actually is incorrect, because nobody would be putting that level investment time into an individual unless it was actually going to benefit their organisations. And how can any programme that's benefiting an organisation to be productive not be a good thing? Okay,
well, let's draw a line under all of that, and let's be a bit more future focused. Obviously, right now we're in the midst of a national emergency and a crisis, and you as the bosses and leaders of your organisations and within this sector of ours will be thinking a lot, not just about the immediate crisis, but of course what comes next and how we, plan ourselves out of this in the COVID-19 recovery phase. What sort of thinking have you got around that issue? Charlotte, start with you. I mean, where do you see the apprenticeship model going in the medium to longer term, and what would you like to see happen?
So, I can take that from my own organisation's angle to start off with. As you'll be aware, we offer a number of programmes that are mostly from level 2 and 3. And a lot of those are within the sectors that have been really affected through the pandemic, such as health, retail and hospitality. Right. So I am having to relook at my business model, as I'm sure a lot of the employers and providers that we work with are also having to do. But I think it's actually thinking, what do we do to make sure there is a recovery package in place to somehow make sure that we continue to develop the skills and make sure that the UK economy can come out of this sooner rather than later. Yeah. So I think we have to think wider than just apprenticeships within this. I think we have to consider the whole of the skills agenda, particularly, those young people that were mentioned actually by Tom Richmond earlier that will be coming out of their formal education. Yeah. And we need to make sure that they continue their learning journey to allow them to get into work. So I think it's making sure we incentivise, and that's not necessarily monetary, the system to actually support that. Great.
Rob, you are one of those training providers. What's your thoughts about the medium term in a nutshell? Got about 30 seconds left. What do you want to...
30 seconds, right. Yeah. I'll take it. Charlotte's points were interesting. We've had different experiences in the financial services sector. Our concerns were that they're going to be breaks in learning, no new starts. It's actually not been the case. All of the employers we work with are continuing with apprenticeships. They're bringing on new starts. And we do have a virtual learning model that we use. And I think, to answer your question, going forward, I think there's going to be more of a move to virtual support with a virtual skills coach and virtual learning to support that learner.
Great. I think that might have even just been below 30 seconds.
Oh, not bad then.
Rob Thakur, Managing Director at Fitch Learning. Charlotte Bosworth, Managing Director at Innovate Awarding. Sorry about the technical difficulties, but we got there in the end. Thanks for joining Skills World.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Who said this wasn't a live show? Anything can happen. My kids could break in at any minute. It's close to bedtime after all. This is from Purple Lilies. Well, it's called Purple Libbies. Enjoy. Okay, folks, that's about all we've got time for. Another episode. Got 5 already, 5 in the can. Only got another 30 to go. Anyway, tomorrow we'll be launching our very first hashtag Stand Up for Skills segment, presented by the City and Guilds Group CEO and our very own Fab board member, Kirsty Donnelly. So make sure you don't miss that. And don't forget, if you want to be on the show, and a lot of people are contacting us now, please email the team at skillsworld@fenews.co.uk. And you can also call us. You won't always pick up, but you can certainly leave a message on the Skype phone. 02032 900 111. And one of the wonderful Skills World Live team will, I'm sure, get back to you. And talking of the team, I'd like to thank today's programme editor, teaches the editor every day, Kelle O'Meara, and our digital producer, Ellie Hansen. Skills World Live is an FE News production supported by the Federation of Awarding Bodies Platinum Partners programme. Goodbye. You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Bewick. News, views and interviews in association with FE News.